A Florida ruin built on a dream to reach the stars.
The challenge was astronomical. We were planning to visit another body in our solar system.
An Indonesian community shattered by an unseen force.
Today, this place is a wasteland of rubble, debris, and earth.
A Bulgarian structure that concealed an ulterior motive.
This place was hiding ambitious plans from the rest of the world.
And an entertainment paradise in the Mediterranean that was years ahead of its time.
This place was once the life and soul of the party, but the music would soon come to an end.
Decaying relics. Ruins of lost worlds. Sites haunted by the past. Their secrets waiting to be revealed. Deep in the Florida Everglades is an industrial ruin that competed in the greatest race humankind has ever witnessed.
Things are normally built in the middle of nowhere to keep them a secret. But here, the land is so flat, it is hardly under the radar.
As you get closer, you can see these buildings have been abandoned for a long time. The roofs are mostly missing. There's debris everywhere.
Where once high-tech equipment filled the cavernous spaces, today only ruins remain.
Inside, some of the buildings are little more than empty warehouses with walls made of corrugated metal.
And in one section, you see an enormous circle sealed in concrete in the floor. It seems to be hiding something important.
Beside the buildings is a long canal. It's not clear what this is used for, but presumably it's connected to the buildings in some way.
What links this overgrown waterway to the industrial remnants? And what role did they play in one of America's greatest triumphs?
I first found this place just digging into different types of historical places in Miami. This was an urban legend that I've heard of many times throughout my life here, and I decided to do a little bit of research on it.
Carolina Flores first visited this location in 2020 after learning about the secrets held inside.
It's definitely got an aura of mystery to it, especially because it's not really a place where you're supposed to go. It looks like they had to just pack up and leave and didn't have time to take anything out. The ceilings are falling, there's water everywhere. The rangers of the Everglades do not venture in this area, so if you get lost, if something happens to you, you're on your own.
For Carolina, the risk is worth the reward.
This site is incredibly important to world history, and most people don't even know that it's here.
Its story begins in the early 1960s, a time when America was striving to reach the final frontier.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
The challenge was astronomical, literally astronomical. We were planning to have human beings leave our planet and visit another body in our solar system. But at this time, in 1962, the US space program was in its infancy. We'd only launched 4 people into space at this point for relatively short duration flights in the Mercury capsule that only held a single astronaut.
If they were going to send 3 astronauts, a lunar lander, and a return module to the moon, they were going to need a bigger rocket than ever.
Kennedy identified one of the ways the monumental feat could be achieved: the simultaneous development of liquid and solid fuel motors, to see which was best for the job in hand.
He didn't have any idea whether this was really possible. The people at NASA didn't know if it was possible. It involved technologies that hadn't been built yet.
California-based weapons maker Aerojet took up the challenge, and in 1963, the company was awarded a $3 million contract to develop solid fuel rocket motors.
So they started looking for a location to build their rocket engine that was close to Cape Canaveral. At the same time, the town of Homestead was looking to bring some developments to its area. So Aerojet and Homestead came to agreement that Aerojet would build a massive industrial facility out in the swamps of the Everglades, far enough away from the city so that no one would be hurt if something blew up.
Within a year, the Aerojet Dade rocket development facility was a hotbed of activity. The company's greatest minds focused on creating the biggest solid fuel motor the world had ever seen.
The solid rocket fuel, in comparison to the liquid rocket fuel, was a lot more powerful and had a lot more thrust. It was very volatile. These chemicals are incredibly hazardous and dangerous to work with.
Solid rockets are like big fireworks. You make this cake of explosive chemicals, and then you light an end of it, and boom, you get tons of thrust out of it.
This thrust was the key to reaching the moon.
To break completely free from the gravitational pull of the Earth and then sail on to the moon, you need a rocket that can travel about 26,000 miles per hour and do it while carrying a load of about 90,000 pounds.
This looks to be one of the labs for the Aerojet facility. This could have been a whiteboard that they use, but they've got the very typical fluorescent lights that they need for a laboratory. So this area was obviously very important.
But Aerojet had a problem. The rocket booster they were planning to build was going to be 150 feet long, packed full of rocket fuel and extremely heavy. There was no way you could put that on a rail car or a truck.
Aerojet needed to find another way to get its giant rocket motor to the Cape Canaveral shuttle launch site.
So the plan was to transport it by barge, so they dug a canal over 15 miles long to the coast.
When it was built, there was a lot of controversy. When a canal is dug in the Everglades, it completely cuts off the water flow, since the Everglades is essentially a slow-moving river.
That canal runs from deep in the Everglades, a river of fresh water that supports a unique ecosystem. The canal drains a good deal of that water off to the east, out into the Atlantic Ocean, when in fact that water is needed to replenish and supply the southern portion of the Everglades.
And so it's really bad for the environment. Despite that, they decided to go ahead and build the canal.
Now, the race was on for Aerojet to prove its design. The AJ260 was ready to take man to the moon.
The question is, did the biggest solid rocket-fueled engine ever built have any chance of actually working?
One of their key needs is to have a way to test this giant rocket. But this rocket's gonna be so powerful, you can't just put it in a stand and light it. It would probably break through any kind of restraint system you designed.
So the way they tested the engine was by putting it in a hole in the ground.
Measuring 150 feet from top to bottom, it was one of the deepest silos ever excavated in the state of Florida.
So directly below us is the drop where the rocket is not even 10 feet away from us. It looks like about half of the hole is submerged in water, but you can still see the top half of the rocket to the right. They tested the rocket in this location 3 times, and the way that they did it was that they turned it upside down so that the nozzle was pointing up.
And then they could ignite it and test it without worrying that it was going to fly off somewhere. Each time it must have been an amazing sight to see. The tower of flame shooting up out of the middle of the Everglades was something you could see from miles and miles away.
The early tests were a resounding success, and the team at Aerojet were confident their launch vehicle was fit for purpose.
Aerojet was making great strides building and testing the monolithic solid fuel rocket NASA wanted. And the rocket seemed to perform as predicted.
So you have all these engineers and scientists high-fiving each other. They're excited, we did it, we did it.
But then in 1967, NASA changed course.
NASA decides to ditch solid rocket engines, and there are 1,000,001 technical reasons why that was. But essentially, a solid rocket just wasn't the right choice. The final rocket, which became known as the Saturn V, used exclusively liquid fuel.
Just 6 years after work at the facility began, Aerojet's funding was withdrawn, and the pioneering project was mothballed.
So, although it was a lot more powerful to use solid fuel, liquid fuel just became more controllable, and they shut this entire place down. It was useless.
A lot of the things were removed from the factory when it closed, but there is one thing that remains, the AJ260 itself. It's buried under a concrete slab, never to be seen again.
One of the ironies of this story is that when NASA was looking for a way to replace the giant Saturn V with a more affordable, reusable system, they returned to the idea of using solid fuel rockets.
The groundbreaking work carried out here wasn't wasted. The technology developed during those years was used in the solid fuel boosters of NASA's new space shuttle.
If you remember those iconic pictures of the shuttle, the 2 long tubes on either side were 2 solid fuel boosters.
The feats and achievements that took place in the American space program at that time is really a testament to human ingenuity and imagination. I mean, to boldly go where no man had gone before was their literal mission.
On the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, a gentle sea laps the coastline of Palu city.
There's this beautiful mosque that kind of sits right on the water line.
But inside, things soon turn ugly.
The walls are mainly beige and tarnished by seawater.
All along the coast are signs of destruction.
You can see either side of the river that there used to be a massive bridge here.
And 2 miles inland is a scene of complete devastation.
To this day, scientists are still trying to uncover what happened here.
The obliteration of these sites appear to be linked. But how? Like many residents, writer and researcher Neni Muhyiddin understands the importance of his hometown's most distinctive mosque.
Kita sekarang berada di Masjid Terapung. Banyak keluarga di sana yang sholat maghrib.
The idea of a mosque that seems to be levitating above the waters was very poignant and beautiful for a lot of people.
On the 28th of September 2018, worshippers gathered in the mosque as usual, and the surrounding beaches were full of people preparing for an annual music festival.
At the floating mosque, the muezzin was about to call for prayer.
Paling rame itu di saat maghrib bahkan. Ada kegiatan di sepanjang jalan ini, juga khususnya tentu masjid ini.
Without warning, disaster struck.
Suddenly, around 6 p.m., about 48 miles north of Palu city, there was an earthquake of 7.5 magnitude.
Waktu gempa terjadi, saya ada di Jalan Tanjung Tururuka, tempat saya tinggal. Gempa susulan berlangsung kurang lebih 1 jam dengan intensitas yang juga kurang lebih sama. Gitu.
Indonesia lies in one of the most geologically active regions on Earth, the Ring of Fire. And Palu City sits between two major faults.
Hampir 70 km dari sini, itu pusat gempa. Di sanalah pusat gempa yang kemudian gempanya menjalar sampai di Palu.
Nenny watched in horror as the powerful quake destroyed his city's infrastructure.
Ini adalah jembatan Palu 4. Saat gempa bumi terjadi, lengkungannya jatuh ke tengah, jadi patahnya di tengah. Itu yang bisa terlihat dari tempat ini.
The earthquake caused great damage right across Palu City. But the devastation of the floating mosque was caused by something far more deadly.
About 8 minutes later, a tsunami came roaring up the inlet.
The earthquakes are believed to have caused a landslide under the sea, sending a tsunami thundering towards land.
Teluk yang memanjang kurang lebih 30 km ke arah utara ini, itu hampir semua titiknya itu terdampak tsunami.
When it hit the coast, the tsunami was traveling at 250 miles an hour.
Yang paling terdampak dari tsunami itu adalah tempat masjid terapung itu.
There were actually people praying in the mosque when it hit.
The mosque was lifted from its pillar supports and crashed in upon itself.
The people who were in it were washed, some of them out to sea.
But it wasn't just one tsunami wave. It was a series of them. And you can only imagine how terrifying it must have been.
Yang parah itu saat tsunami menghantam bagian timur.
The beaches were teeming with people, and hundreds lost their lives to the killer waves. When Nenny headed inland, he discovered that the horror was far from over. The neighborhood of Balaroa, which was way beyond the reach of the tsunami, had suffered an even worse fate.
Saya tiba di sini kurang lebih itu pukul 9 dan situasinya kacau, listrik mati. Orang tuh ada dalam situasi menyelamatkan diri dan keluarganya, jadi orang terdekat gitu ya. Begitu banyak warga yang minta tolong untuk menyelamatkan keluarganya yang tertimbun rumah.
Throughout the night, a series of relentless mud flows had engulfed Balaroa. In the harsh light of day, the destruction was clear for all to see.
sekali barang-barang pribadi warga di sini yang bisa ditemukan. Paling banyak, apalagi yang kelihatan ini pasti punya anak-anak itu. Yang bisa merasakan kehilangan orangnya, maksudnya bagaimana sejarah keluarga yang ada di banyak tempat ini, kemudian bisa kita rasakan dari tinggalan-tinggalan yang seperti ini.
But as Balaroa lay far from the deadly floodwaters, many struggled to understand why it had been engulfed.
Ini vegetasi yang tumbuh di rawa, dan vegetasi inilah yang menjelaskan tentang dulunya tempat ini seperti apa.
Balaroa was built in the 1980s on top of a swamp, but was it really safe to build a residential area on the swamp? There were many people who had their doubts.
The concerns proved chillingly accurate when the 2018 earthquake struck.
The waves of an earthquake hit that kind of ground, it forces water up into the soil.
This makes the particles in the soil lose contact with each other. So soil, which is solid, loses those characteristics and gains those of a liquid. Essentially, it flows.
This process, known as liquefaction, created the mud flows that had submerged Balaroa. More than 1,700 homes and at least 600 lives were lost that night.
Entire houses, livestock, and vehicles were swallowed by debris and churned up with soil and sediment. And the mosque itself was moved over 250 meters from its original spot.
Sudah apa yang kita lihat hari ini, yang sudah ditinggalkan ini, menggambarkan tentang semua ciri liquefaksi yang terjadi.
The survivors tried to make sense of what had happened.
Itu banyak kisah menyedihkan keluarga-keluarga yang cuma bisa dengar suaranya lalu menghilang. Ya ini kayak kuburan massal ya buat warga di sini karena ada begitu banyak korban di Perumnas Balaroa ini yang kemudian tidak ditemukan.
Today, much of the devastation in Palu city has not been repaired.
You can still see the scars of this disaster throughout the city. The residents have asked for it to be kept this way.
Ini seperti laboratorium hidup yang bisa orang kunjungi dan lihat gitu betapa liquefaksi itu bisa sekuat itu.
On Spain's Balearic Isles are the remains of an Ibizan legend.
Breaking through the tree line, you see a very odd structure dug into the hillside.
There's this big amphitheater and other outdoor spaces that look like they're set up for certain kinds of performances.
Clearly, this site has been abandoned for some time.
Pooling water on the floors, wires hanging from the ceiling, chunks of concrete littering the rooms. This place looks broken.
And as you peer out of what used to be a doorway, there's this pile of burnt-out cars.
On the artwork-covered walls are some tantalizing clues.
A lot of people have come here specifically to make some kind of creative expression. Some of it very almost trippy and mystical.
The graffiti on the steps say, "Don't stop the music."
These defaced ruins are part of the story of how Ibiza became the party capital of the world.
In the 1960s, this area, like much of the island, was rural and quiet. Vicente Maritur grew up less than a mile away.
Y entonces, pues que en un sitio tan apartado y en plena montaña existiera este lugar, pues me pareció increíble.
In 1969, when construction began, the owners had to bring everything in, from the power to the water supply.
They even had to build the road to get there.
This is Festival Club.
This place was one of the first on the island to put together the concept of a large, multi-purpose nightclub.
The Festival Club was meant to be a kind of 360 entertainment zone, not unlike a Disney World or a combination of a music venue and an amusement park and a cultural center.
Its doors opened in 1972. Vicente remembers the first time he came here.
Yo tenía 20 años y entonces me pareció un sitio espectacular. Bueno, había varias barras.
Champán, me acuerdo que una de las propagandas era champán a gogo.
Drinks were not the only attraction. Live music was central to the experience.
Estamos en el escenario donde tocaba la orquesta. Pues todo aquí estaba la pista rodeada de mesas y de sillones y con toda la clientela y miraban el escenario.
The main stage would have acts ranging from magicians, orchestras playing Spanish music, and covers of famous songs from the time. Apparently, Delilah by Tom Jones was a big hit here.
And of course, there was the nighttime attraction of the Grand Discotheque.
Guests were also drawn to a very Spanish form of entertainment.
This strange circular structure, it wasn't a stage, it was actually a ring where they used to put on bullfights.
They didn't actually stage true bullfights, but they did demonstrations of what bullfighting was like with young, not particularly dangerous bulls. So people got a taste of bullfighting, maybe the way someone in the US might go to a Wild West town and see a staged gunfight, but no animals or people were harmed in the production.
With everything on offer, the club represented a massive investment, especially for the early 1970s.
Today we're so used to hotel resorts and entertainment complexes, but back then this would have seemed quite massive.
They really needed to have a few good seasons in a row in order to get this thing in the black.
The business model was based on a supposedly guaranteed source of revenue, provided by a revolution in international travel.
The package holiday was bursting onto the scene, with all your flights, accommodation, and entertainment all rolled into one price.
Travelers would just pay an agency that would put them on a plane, then put them on a bus, and large busloads of people were expected to be rolling up to the gates of the Festival Club as parts of these package tours.
But an evening here was a far cry from partying in one of Ibiza's modern clubs.
O a tomar una copa o ver el show, la gente iba vestida pues muy arreglada. O sea, muchas señoras con vestido largo, muchos caballeros con su traje y corbata. La gente, si no hubiera venido vestida elegantemente, digamos, seguramente no habría sido admitida.
And the guests were expected to behave accordingly.
This is the waning days of the Generalissimo Franco dictatorship. It was a very conservative country, both politically and religiously, a very Catholic country.
So much so, a bishop even opened the club.
Y yo había pues visto alguna vez alguna pareja que sus besos eran apasionados, pues que el camarero o el director de la sala se acercara a la mesa y con educación les dijera, por favor, y conserven sus o reserven sus intimidades para cuando estén fuera de la sala de fiestas.
Despite occasionally offending local sensibilities, the club continued to attract visitors from around the world. But only 1 year after it opened, tragedy struck.
Events thousands of miles away would spell the end of the party at the festival club.
In 1973, OPEC, a group of oil-producing states, decided to protest the way various countries around the world were dealing with Israel by embargoing their oil.
All those tour operators who'd made huge profits bringing tourists to the islands found themselves facing higher costs, and they passed those costs on to their customers.
As a result, 50,000 fewer tourists made the trip to Ibiza. Faced with a lack of visitors, the owners just couldn't afford to keep the lights on. And the festival club closed its doors in 1974.
After the recovery from the oil crisis, tourist numbers in Ibiza skyrocketed, and they've pretty much increased year on year ever since.
Posiblemente, si esto se hubiera construido muchos años más tarde, en la época brillante de las discotecas de Ibiza, yo diría que en los años, desde los años 80 hasta ahora, sí que habría tenido mucho éxito.
Despite being abandoned in the 1970s, that wasn't the end of the music at the festival club.
As the rave scene came to the fore in the 80s and 90s, the ruined club became the perfect location for illegal raves. Hundreds of people would descend onto the dance floor with huge sound systems, and the DJs would set up on the old stage and party deep into the night.
When the authorities put an end to the illegal raves, the ruined buildings became a mecca for graffiti artists. For Vicente, though, there is beauty in the deserted festival club.
Y como a mí me gusta la poesía, pues tal vez que la naturaleza ocupe su lugar y con una música de fondo o una melodía de los tiempos en que aquí pues hubo fiesta.
In the Bulgarian seaside resort of Sozopol is an island of ghostly ruins which are impossible to ignore.
From the town, you can't help but be captivated by the imposing structures standing on St. Kirik.
A man-made breakwater connects the island to the town, but public access is strictly forbidden.
The main building used to be beautiful and grand, but now it's decaying and full of weeds.
At first glance, it looks like an embassy or government building of some sort. You definitely get the sense that at one time something vital was happening here.
In the depths of this ruin is a crumbling room with dusty photos on the walls.
These images are the remnants of a secret operation destined to alter the course of Bulgaria's history.
This was part of an ambitious and covert plan for revenge.
Какво ще има вътре? Това ще отговори на моите очаквания.
Author Maria Dimoloreva has been researching the island of St. Kirik since 2004, but this is her first time here. The island's most prominent structure is shrouded in mystery. Maria is on a mission to find out the real reason behind its construction.
тази сграда и от тогава аз издирвам сведения за нея. Искрено се надявам, че пристъпвайки в нея или поне до нея, всички мои въпроси, на които аз търся отговори, ще се случат.
The building was commissioned by the Bulgarian government in 1924 for a staggering amount of money, equivalent in today's terms to $25 million.
The official line was the Bulgarian government was establishing a fisheries school,
which was notably unusual at the time when fishing was learned at home, not in the classroom.
Electricity and even central heating were going to be seen for the first time in this sleepy backwater. According to Bulgarian officials, there was a very good reason for the new venture.
Since the beginning of the 20th century, Bulgarians had really gravitated towards the countryside rather than towards the coast. Now, the Bulgarian state needed a new generation of men that could take advantage of the coast and use the sea to generate revenue.
Са разположени класните стаи. Над нея етажа са разположени спалните помещения на учениците, които са учили в училището, или средната най-висока част на сградата са се намирали жилищата на учителския персонал.
The admission criteria for prospective students looked like an attempt to right past wrongs.
The school was created with the goal of bringing in orphans or refugees from the First World War.
It was a 4-year course with full board, and the novice fishermen were even given an interest-free loan to buy all the equipment they would ever need.
The motives for establishing the school appeared to be sound. But all was not as it seemed.
There were rooms and features that really didn't add up.
The first sign something wasn't right surfaced when construction began.
The first stone was laid in 1924, and unusually the ceremony was attended by top governmental officials and even the King of Bulgaria.
During the ceremony, the king gives a rousing speech, and the words are very evocative and emotional.
Обръща към тях с думите, че в името на паметта на техните бащи, паднали за свободата на нашето отечество, те трябва в това училище, обучавайки се да изградят силна воля и добра дисциплина, да бъдат верни на отечеството си като добри моряци.
It was a speech that seemed better suited to naval cadets than humble fishermen.
Ането на такъв вид училище е малко необичаен от гледна точка на интереса, който той предизвиква.
But what could the king really be trying to accomplish with all this?
The king's inspiring words threatened to give the game away.
Положение на всички помещения в сградата, нейната архитектура като цяло говори, че тя е не просто учебна сграда или просто пансион, а тя е имала и предназначение като военен обект.
But Bulgaria was prohibited from having a navy or investing in any kind of military organization.
Post-World War I was a really humiliating period for Bulgaria. They had picked the losing side in the war, joining the Central Powers cause.
Like many of the defeated countries, Bulgaria was forced to sign a treaty, ceding land and committing to drastically reduce its army and navy.
The prohibition on more than one service academy meant that they would never be able to have a navy again.
Bulgaria was not going to take any of this lying down.
The Bulgarians were quietly seething, and they developed a plan to seize some of their territory back.
The Sozopol Fisheries School was central to this ambitious scheme.
Bulgaria was secretly preparing for war. This wasn't just a fisheries school.
And this is going to be a way to maintain the capability, the skill set of navigation and ship management and all of the requirements for a naval officer in spite of the Allied restrictions.
Suddenly, the king's speech began to make sense.
These seemingly innocuous apprentice fishermen were actually secretly training to be naval warriors.
And in 1939, Bulgaria got the chance to put its plan into action.
When World War II started, Bulgaria sided with Nazi Germany, another country that shared its resentment at the peace treaty and a strong desire to return to its former glory. During the war, the school became exclusively a military zone. All civilians were forbidden.
After it became clear that Bulgaria had once again picked the wrong side, it looked like history was about to repeat itself. That was until the Soviet Red Army invaded in September 1944.
And the Bulgarian authorities, very wisely seeing which way the wind is blowing, switched sides. They abandoned their Nazi allies and joined Stalin instead.
Under the newly installed communist government, the military presence here was quickly expanded.
When Bulgaria became a satellite of the Soviet Union, more buildings were put up, which you can see today, encircling the original one from the 1920s.
St. Kirik became an official naval base, home to 2 naval divisions and a repair depot.
През периода 40-50 години е построена сградата, която е зад мен. Тя е построена специално за кабинети и на офицерския състав към тогавашния момент и за стаи, съхраняващи секретни материали и по-специални такива за нуждите на армията.
After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the island remained in military hands until it shut down in 2007.
The 38 buildings that remain on the island are all completely abandoned, and there's no access to the public. They're very strict about this.
Today, the Bulgarian government is still deciding what is next for the island of St. Kirik. The hope is that it can be reinvented as a place for the people.
And now that Bulgaria is no longer interested in exercising its force overseas with violence, this island can go back to being a regular island.
There are talks of making the island into a tourist attraction, which makes sense considering its complex past, but nothing's really come of it yet.